And welcome everybody to another edition of Bangers and Classics, which features me, James Ruppert, and him, David Malloy. And let's find out what David's been up to.
Oh, not a lot, James. Well, I got an award this week.
Oh, did you?
I got the annual Compo Simmonite Sartorial Elegance Award. So I'm
Right.
quite proud of that. That's about it. I mean, I have spotted a couple of interesting cars this week, though, I have to say.
Yeah.
I was at the filling station, I think it was last Sunday or Monday, and I was coming out of the shop. In pulled a very nice Aston Martin. Not a new one, a classic Aston Martin. In fact, a DB5, a metallic brown DB5 that merited close inspection. So as soon as the owner stepped away from it, I sort of took a little T2 around the car and had a look. And it was in absolutely spiffing condition, better than new, I would say. Been restored to within an inch of its life. Yeah, absolutely lovely. I'm surprised. I couldn't find a speck of dust on it, which was miraculous enough, given it was quite a windy day. But yeah, the guy must keep it in cotton wool. Well, like I nearly said mothballs. Yeah, the owner must keep it in cotton wool. He really must, because there wasn't a single mark on it that I could see. Very nice. Moving down the price scale a bit, but perhaps for many not the desirability scale, I also saw a couple of days ago a 309. Now, it's not the red 309 GTI that I sometimes see. This was a grey one. I couldn't tell you, because I passed it in traffic, if it was a GTI or not. It looked as though it might have been. Either way, it's such a rare sight. It's a very welcome sight.
Well, it is, absolutely. It's always good to see things like that. I actually saw a very French 2CV, and I say very French because it wasn't sort of a special edition bamboo all done up to the nines. It was one which was scruffy. It was a scruffy 2CV parked in a car park. And that sort of lifted my spirits, a tiny bit. I just thought, there you go. It's a 2CV being used. It was like it had sort of come out of the time tunnel, from deep in the southernmost tip of France. It was quite a nice thing to see. And apart from that, I've also there's a Reliant Graveyard near me. It's in someone's front garden, but it contains a scimitar and it contains a kitten. And I will have to look into it. It's a very odd place. I do want to take a photo of it, but it's one of those places where if they caught you taking a photo, I think they might come out and do you over. So I've got to be very subtle, I think, about the way I do it. I've got to sneak up or use some disguise. But it is quite an interesting front
you could take your beard off.
I could do, but there's a Land Rover there. There's something else there. So there's all sorts of interesting things there. But they've, they seem to have given up with the Reliance. And apropos of that, I also saw a Reliant Rialto on the road, not very far away, but it doesn't belong to them because I've never seen it parked at that house. So that's a completely separate spot. So, yeah, lots of, and at least that was a three-wheeled one, whereas the Graveyard just contained four-wheeled Reliants.
Yeah. Well, the kitten's a very rare car, though.
It is, isn't it? Yeah, it is pretty much. But this one I think needs some work.
Yes. I'm just thinking, James, that most people have to put on a fake beard to go into disguise. You could take yours off.
Well, I could do, absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, I've got a better idea.
Yeah.
You could wear a Keir Starmer mask and nobody would ever know who it was. You could, that's it. Shockingly said. I mean, a John Major mask is also available for very similar effect, I believe.
Well, that's right. There is a comedian called Andrew Lawrence, and I don't know if you've watched him. Yeah, and his Keir Starmer is very good because obviously his first line is "You don't know who I am," but we don't want to get political, do we?
No. So moving swiftly on, it's time for this week's banger or classic, and we've picked a British icon to some, perhaps not to others. It's the Metro, and Mr. Sir James Ruppert is going to lead us off in this one. James, what do you think of the Metro? Banger or classic?
I'm not keen at all on them. I did actually drive. I drove a van for a short while. Actually, there was certainly it was called an Austin Metro van, but I think there were a very small number of Morris Metro vans, wasn't there? But yeah, and that was it. Yeah, like a cage in the back. You could get loads of boxes in the back of it, but I just never ever saw the point of it. Really, it just seemed like I never liked the looks of it, and it was just, I don't know, it was just an uglier Mini to me. I suppose a more practical Mini, because you could actually use the hatchback, but I didn't think it was as marvelous as it was supposed to be.
No.
I thought it was okay to drive, but it didn't really move me. They don't make me go moist, and I don't really miss them at all. So yeah, I'll be controversial and say no, it's just an old small rusty car to me now. But I know I'll be alone on that. What about you, David?
You think? Well, I don't know. I'm going to go banger as well, and here's why. Metro back in the day was described to me by somebody as a puddle jumper. Yeah. And I kind of get that. But I remember I was about, mid-teens or something, early teens when they came out. And like most people, I wanted them to succeed. I wanted British Leyland to do well. Because why wouldn't you? I remember the fanfare that greeted its launch, and I saw it. I thought, oh, that doesn't look great, does it? Because it was up against a Mark I Ford Fiesta, which was quite a nice-looking little car. I thought, well, I've got the looks wrong, and I've got the A-Series engine, which I think, it's been around since the Arc. It's not the best power plant. And it just went from there. I just didn't ever feel that it was a particularly good car. Wasn't great to look at. It wasn't special to drive. It lagged a little bit behind the competition, I think, in terms of its packaging. British Leyland had years to develop this car, and that was what they came up with. They came up with a car that was really underwhelming, and that was the problem. Perhaps it wasn't such a bad car, but it was just one that disappointed. And maybe that's the reason why I felt the way I did about them at the time and still do. I thought, with all the time you guys had, is that the best you could come up with? For me, regrettably, the Metro isn't a classic. It just fell short of what I was hoping for, and I think what a lot of people were hoping for. And for that reason, I'm going to have to regrettably consign it to the pile marked bangers. So there we go. We agree on that one.
Absolutely.
Whilst we don't think the Metro is a British icon, James wants to talk about somebody who most certainly was and remains a great British icon, Eric Morecambe.
Eric Morecambe had a Jensen Interceptor, and there's a very famous story of he was having a heart attack, and he was in his Jensen Interceptor, and he wasn't very well, and there was this old boy walking past, and he said, "Would you drive me to hospital?" And the bloke said, well, he said, I haven't driven anything. He said, the last thing I drove was a Sherman tank. And so he said this bloke got in, and he was crashing the gears. And you see, that's the thing. I think it was an automatic. But
it would be automatic, yeah.
It would be, wouldn't it? But he said he made a terrible, mess of it all. I'm sure it was just a good story that he was, dealing with this bloke who the last thing he'd driven was a tank, and he was driving his car. But as you know, David, if you can drive a tank, I think you can pretty much drive anything at all. But it made for a good story that it was an old bloke who was treating his Jensen roughly.
I'll tell you another story, and this wasn't only Fools and Horses. They used it, but I have this in good authority. This happened in Glasgow in early 1980s, certainly before 1986, because that's when I heard the story. And I spoke to somebody who says he was there and this happened. Story goes that a German sailor was arrested for misbehaving on a night out. I think it was a German Navy ship or whatever, a merchant vessel that was in Glasgow. It was due to depart the next day. The sailor was taken to court to be processed. And of course, he didn't speak a word of English, or didn't speak very much English. And there was no interpreter. So the sheriff said, we've got a problem here. This young man needs to get back to his ship, but he can't understand what's going on. I can't communicate with him very well. And the interpreter's not turned up. Is there anybody in the court who speaks German? At this, an old boy up the back stood up and says, yes, my lord, I was a prisoner of war from 1940 to 45. I picked up a bit of lingo. Excellent, says the sheriff. Come on down. So the old chap comes down to the front of the court, and he says, could you ask him his name? He says, certainly, sir. He says, what is your name? He got done for contempt of court, which I think was a disgrace. That's the punchline. But I am assured by a guy who said he was a court officer. I remember chatting to him about this probably in the 90s. And he said, look, that happened. I was there. I saw it. It was him that told me that the old boy got done for contempt, as I say that, which was a disgrace. That was brilliantly funny, very inventive. But some people have just got no blooming sense of humour. Right, and on that note, we'll take a break. You're listening to the Bangers and Classics podcast with James Ruppert and David Malloy. And we are back after that little break. Now, we're going to do something on Twitter in the next few days. The idea is that we nominate 12 cars, one from each of 12 countries, and you guys vote on which you think is the worst. So what we're going to do to start us off is we're going to go through the list of cars and the countries. I'll read them out, and James and Alan will both comment on them. So we'll start off with the good old US of A, and the car that's been picked for that is the Amc Gremlin. How does that grab you, James? The Gremlin.
Yeah, I really like the look of that, but I could be completely alone.
Yep.
in that, but it was a very strange shape on wheels, and I quite like that. And I think you could get V8. I think they had didn't they have a 6-cylinder, and there might have been a 4-cylinder as well. But
no, you're right. They had a V8 which is about 150 horsepower. It was useless. Handled poorly, went very poorly. The big engine, but with no power, and it was pot ugly. So poor old Gremlin. That's my take. James, you're rather more favourably disposed to it, though.
I just like the look of it. Yeah, I mean that's just me. I'm a curious chap in that respect.
You're urging people not to vote for the Gremlin.
Well, if you say that. There you go. Maybe I am.
Well, there we go. Yeah, I think so. So we'll move on to the UK, the home team. And the entry there is the BMC 1800 Land Crab. And that might be a controversial entry. Don't know, James, what do you reckon? Controversial?
No, I don't think so. I thought it was even though it was an Isagonis Giant Mini, effectively, I didn't have a lot of time for it. I mean, there was lots of space in it, and actually, when you think about it, it's much better than a Maxi. It was just a great big thing, wasn't it? In a way. Everyone went and bought a Cortina instead. Quite right.
Yeah. It was underdeveloped from day one, which was kind of a theme with British Leyland and their forebears. It was terminally dull to look at for a start. It wasn't particularly wonderful to drive. The driving position was very poor. And, of course, it was unreliable because it was made by BMC. And it was all very sad. But there's no room for sentiment. So I think we're both agreed on that one, James.
That's right.
Okay. Now, for France, controversially again, gone for the Peugeot 605. It's a more recent example. I thought of the 5... No, sorry, tell a lie. It's the Peugeot 607. Ignore me. We've gone for a more recent version. So what do you think, James? The 607? Does it deserve its place in the contest?
It was a great big mini cab, really, wasn't it? Effectively, but it was a massively depreciating thing. Again, I quite like the look of them, really, but I know that they're utterly pointless. I mean, any French stab at luxury is always doomed to failure, and obviously, you'd rather have an E34 BMW rather than spend the money on that and lose all your money on a 607. But I sort of don't care in a way. It's a Peugeot. It's an old Peugeot.
Oh dear. Well, for me, I'd echo much what James says. It's pointless. Big French cars, no matter how good they are, and there have been some good ones, they just do not sell. And as such, they're a waste of time and resources. So although it looks pretty good, and though it might even have actually been a decent car, it makes the list simply because it begs the question, why? So we'll move on now to Italy. Now, Italy, I thought of the Alfa Romeo Arna for this one, but that was an Italy-Japan hookup. So I moved a little bit further forward in time and went for the Fiat Stilo. Any thoughts on the Stilo, James? Did it have style for you?
Again, it's one of those cars I sort of admire slightly, but it is completely and utterly forgettable. And it's one of those you have to really struggle to remember that it ever existed, and that's sort of a bit of a shame, really. But I think it did a job. But I don't think anybody had worked out exactly what the job was, because obviously you'd go and buy a Golf, wouldn't you? You wouldn't buy one of those. So yeah, it does sort of fall by the wayside as a sort of a one of the forgotten Fiats for me.
Yeah. Well, to me, it's a charisma-free car. I mean, it emphasises the point that the Italians shouldn't try to copy the Germans. Why bother? Italian cars are not good because they share the same qualities as German cars. They're good because they've got style, they've got panache, they've got brio. And unfortunately, the Stilo was lacking in those things. And it didn't even make a good job of copying German cars. Unfortunately, the Stilo does make the list as Italy's entry. So that's one for the Azzurri. Moving on to Germany, and this is going to be controversial, James.
Yeah.
I've gone for the Beetle, the original Beetle.
Right.
Right. As our German car expert, what do you reckon?
Well, as you know, David, it is actually a British car because we do have Major Ivan Hurst to thank for its ultimate survival because it certainly wasn't a production car. It was beforehand. It was made in very, very tiny numbers indeed. Before the war and after the war, it was a success. But well, it's one of those things you can compare it absolutely and directly with a Morris Minor, which actually was a much better car to drive and certainly more roomy. But it just wasn't marketed as well. I think the Mark I Beetle was a brilliantly marketed car, but not actually a brilliant car itself. So actually, yeah, I revel in your controversy on this, in that, yeah, maybe it should be put into its place. I know it's an icon, and I know that you made beach buggies out of it, and that was quite interesting. But yeah, otherwise it was just a rusty, cramped, noisy car, which doesn't really have anything to recommend it, does it, on the practical front?
No, I mean, to me, it's a worthy car. It was unquestionably reliable. And as you say, it was brilliantly marketed. The marketing campaign in America was superb. But it was very factually marketed. That was a great thing. They took all the plus points and they made sure the potential purchasers were informed of those, which is what you should do. But as a product, dull. It didn't handle very well. It was old technology, really. It was dated before its time. And to me, it just was uninspired. The marketing was inspired. The product wasn't. I don't dislike them. There's a place for them, obviously. But today, that place is in the contest. And that's where it's going. So, moving on to Spain now. You might be thinking, it's a Seat. Well, it's not. We've got a Renault here. It's a Renault 7, the booted version of the Renault 5, which was built and developed by a company that is now owned by Renault. It's now been fully incorporated into Renault. But at the time, Renault had a minority stake in it. The company was called FASA, F-A-S-A. And I don't know, James, what do you think? A booted 5? Do you think that's a fair shout for the contest?
Yeah, it is really, because it's completely pointless, isn't it? Because the whole point of a Renault 5 was that it had a hatchback, wasn't it? What's the point of sticking a boot on it? So it just seems a waste of metal, really, doesn't it? And it's less practical and all that sort of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, to my mind, I've scribbled down here in my note, one word, ugly. Then I added pointless, because the Renault 5 was all the car you needed. And frankly, the Renault 5, for 90% of people, was all the car you actually needed. That was a great design, great little car. Okay, they rusted, but big fan of the 5. 7, sadly, no, not for me. But the listeners get the chance to vote on it, and they will determine whether it's a goodie or a baddie, really. No.
Well, they do know better than us, David, as you well know.
You can say that. I'll never admit to that. You know me. I'm a feisty character these days. I take on the world. I've got them outnumbered, I reckon. Anyway, moving on to Russia, and Russia. Where do we go here? Lada, which of course really it was a vase under another name. Not a sort of vase your mum kept flowers in, but a company that's made, and I believe still makes, cars in Russia. It was a reheated Fiat 124. So rugged, reliable, and cheap. all good things, if you ask me. But people were looking for better back then. And, that's just it. It's not a bad car by any stretch of the imagination. If you bought one, and I know some people who did and were very happy with it, it was fine. But, picking a Russian car for the list, that one is the obvious choice. So it makes it. What do you think, James?
Yeah, it was just a very old Fiat, wasn't it? Reheated, really. And I think it had, beefier suspension and some other bits and bobs, but really it's a very crude thing. And people do get very sentimental about things like this, but I don't think they've ever driven one. And if you've driven one, it's quite a grim experience, really.
Well, Kimi Räikkönen one.
Did he?
Apparently so. He liked it. He said it wasn't a great car, but it never broke down.
Yeah.
Never let him down in the Finnish winters when he had it when he was a young man. So,
well, there you go.
Anyway, Japan. Oh dear. Now, where do we go from here? I have lots of potential candidates. I am not really a fan of Japanese cars per se. I'm going to go for one from my childhood, and it was marketed here as a Datsun, and it's the Cherry 120Y. You remember that, obviously, James. Do you think that's a fitting car to put into the contest?
You might. Yeah, you might as well. There was a lot of them about. There was a lot of them about for a while in the 1970s, and some of them survived into the 80s, and then they rusted away, and now you don't see them. And again, it's one of those cars that people have rose-tinted spectacles about. Really, they just think it's sort of it's an interesting car to look at. It's a fussy car, because that's when Japanese cars first came here. They were, I would describe as fussy when it came to the details, which almost describes every car design today, where they just seem to go over the top. But yeah, there was lots of chrome on it. But at least it would start in the morning, and that's why people bought them.
Well, yeah, start in the morning, you get lots of optional extras, and other cars came with it as free.
Yeah.
That was it. It was well equipped. But as you say, it was the styling to the detailing was over ornate, and if we're being honest, it was boring. It was just dull. It was up against, say, the Alfa Sud. It was a much more reliable car than the Alfa Sud. But if you came out of the house in the morning and you thought, I want to go for a drive somewhere, what would you jump into? The Cherry or the Alfa Sud? I'm not saying you wanted to arrive, you just wanted to get on the drive.
Yeah.
If you wanted to arrive, you'd probably take the Cherry.
Yeah.
But yeah. Anyway, moving quickly on to Sweden. We've had a few bad experiences with Saab, so I've chucked in this Saab just out of badness on my part. I'm going for the Sonnet 4, the last of the little Saab sports cars. Mostly sold in the USA, but there are some here. What do you reckon, James?
I've had very good experiences with Saabs, actually, David. And
Well, lucky beggar, that's all I'm saying.
Absolutely. But so I don't see what your problem is. And it's a very cute little sort of slightly wedgy little car. And there's nothing wrong with that. No,
The problems we had were two cars with full service history with diesel engines. The engines were absolutely tanked. Dropped valve in one and sludge on the other, which shouldn't happen to modern engines. So there. Not impressed, Saab, not impressed. But as far as the Sonnet goes, again, worthy, I suppose you could say. Compromised looks, and just a bit of a yawn fest. Comparing it to other sort of sports cars that era, Fiat X19 or something like that, just didn't give you the feeling of wanting to own one or drive one. Just uninspiring, I'm afraid. So we'll move on from Sweden and into the Netherlands, and the car that's going to get a clogging possibly from the listeners is the DAF 66. And what do you reckon, James?
I quite like those, and of course they hadn't had an elastic band, and providing that didn't go twang, you were, and you pushed it forward to go forward, and you pulled it back to go back, and what could be better than that? So, and they used to win rallies as well, didn't they? They did extremely well, actually, in their class. I think I sort of failed to see what your problem is, David. Really, I think you've gone wrong here, unless you're going to put me right and point out something.
Of course. Yeah. Well, the problem is I can't think of anything at all to say about it, and that's damning in itself. It's there, it exists. You've got the CVT, but I mean, who cares? An elastic band.
I think you could buy it was called a Marathon, wasn't it? Wasn't there a Marathon version, and that had stripes on it and everything?
It's called Snickers now.
Yeah.
The Daft 66 stickers.
Yeah,
Oh dear, that's a topic in itself. Oh no,
it
no, I must be nuts to go say all these things. Right,
is.
enough chocolate bar and puns. Yes, well, we'll move on from the Daft 66 because I just can't think of anything I want to say about it, sadly. Yeah, again, not really a bad car, but just nothing special. Sorry, guys. Czech Republic. Now, people used to laugh at Skoda. One of the reasons that Nazi Germany invaded the Czech Republic was actually to get their hands on Skoda and the tanks they made. Believe it or not, back in the 30s. They had a good reputation as engineers. By the time we got to the 80s, or even late 70s, they were bringing cars over here, and one was the Skoda Estelle, and that's the one that's been nominated for the contest. What do you reckon, James?
A bloke down our road used to have a Skoda Estelle, and it never broke down. So I don't know. It was okay by me.
Yeah, did
And
he ever drive it though? I mean,
he did actually. No, he used to
really?
drive it. He replaced a Mini with it, and I've told the story elsewhere.
No.
But he was actually a multi-millionaire, and he had this,
Right.
and he had a Skoda Estelle.
Right.
So that was actually quite funny.
Do you have any? Sorry. I was going to say you don't have any corners where you live or lived. I take it.
No, probably not. And
that explains it. Yeah.
Well, that's right. Yeah, he probably used it just to go shopping, and you could get a lot of shopping under the bonnet, of course, because the engine was in the incorrect place. But I still quite like them.
Yeah, I mean, I know the Skoda was quite successful at rallies. Was it John Hogland, I think, the Norwegian driver, did quite well with them for a time. But that would be the coupe version. The Estelle was notorious at one time in the UK because of its handling, its swing axle handling. Swing axles have never worked in any car. You go back to the early GT6s, you go back to the Corvair, and so on, and the Estelle, they just do not handle well at all. Again, as you say, James, cheap, reliable, yep, absolutely. But my advice would be buy a Lada instead. You'll get round the corner on that at least. So we go on to the last one. And it's Australia. You're going to get a mark here that not many people have heard of. And it's kind of an Australian mark, but it's also a Japanese mark. It's called Lonsdale. Do you remember that, James? The Lonsdale.
Yeah, that's right. It's Mitsubishi related, isn't it?
Yeah. It was a cunning plan by Mitsubishi, who built cars in Australia, to get round import quotas to the UK. And what they did was they took a Mitsubishi Galant and they built it in Australia and badge engineered it as a Lonsdale, and they brought them over here and sold them for a couple of years in the 80s. Didn't work. Again, like the Daft 66, it's eminently forgettable, and so much so that it flopped, and the dealerships, I think, folded within 2 years. The remaining cars were hastily rebadged as Mitsubishis and sent off to Mitsubishi showrooms. It's kind of like the Daft 66, as I said, forgettable. I'm quite sure that people went out to buy one and forgot what they were going to buy by the time they got to the showroom. That's how forgettable it was. But it's on the list, and perhaps you don't want to forget about it by voting for it as being a bad car. I don't know. So there we have it, James. Those are the contenders for the inaugural car contest run by Bangers and Classics. A bit of a mixed bag there. Bound to upset some people.
Well, I'd blame you, David, because you did all the hard graft on that, and I just do the sarky comments. But
yeah, you just disagree with me all the time. That's it. That's the whole point of it, though. See, there's no echo chamber here. That's the thing. That's the important thing about Bangers and Classics. James and I come up with different theories. We argue about it, then we decide I was right in the first place. Actually, we don't. That's not true. But anyway, right. So this will be up on the Bangers and Classic Twitter page in a few days' time. All 12 cars, and how you play is you simply vote for the car that you think deserves to win the contest by being the most rubbish car out of the 12 there. And that's it. And if we do it again, we'll take suggestions from you. If you think there's a car that we should have entered into the contest, then we'll be glad to hear from you with your suggestions.
Is there actually a prize, David? I just wondered.
Well, we might do something. We can perhaps
do
something.
We could think of something.
We can do, yeah. We'll put that up on the Twitter page. I can think of a couple of things we can give as prizes.
Yeah.
I've got an Only Fools and Horses bottle opener that doesn't work. No. We'll come up with something better than that. A signed photograph of James on the Afterburner tour or something.
Yeah, okay. That'll do me.
ZZ top again, yeah. check out the Bangers and Classics website at www.bangersandclassics.com. Right, this is the final part of this week's podcast, and this was something that we tried to do last week, but the internet let us down. It's another challenge that we've set ourselves, and this one is the 10 grand challenge. We've each been given 10,000 virtual pounds and been sent out to find an American car that has to be long, have a V8 engine, and the more ridiculous looking, in fact, the more ridiculous a car it is, the better. But we're going to try and find one of those for sale in the UK with an MOT at the moment, and this is what we'll come up with, and James will lead us off.
Well, David, I had a bit of a panic attack because obviously I did think to myself, was there a budget on this? Because I saw so many nice cars that were beyond the budget, but I'd obviously forgotten what the budget was. So I picked two, David. So I picked one that's over budget, which obviously can be completely ignored, but I quite like the look of it, which was a 1960 Pontiac Catalina. And that was going for 13.5, and apparently the mileage is 54,000. It's in regular use. It has an MOT and all that sort of stuff, and it was just a fantastic looking car. It's also the fact that Pontiacs don't exist anymore is quite nice, but it's one of those great big bargey things from across the ocean that I like. And then obviously I came to my senses because £13,500 it was beyond the budget. So my fallback position is a 1973 Cadillac Fleetwood.
No, wait a minute, it's not the blue one, is it?
It's a 9950.
Oh, you've nicked my car,
20 grand. Really? Seriously?
Yeah,
Have we done that again?
I read this one out
loud. We should do something useful with this ability that we have. I mean, we obviously have a superpower, David, which, we could probably change the world in some way, shape or form or become superheroes. But all we managed to do is pick the same car out of millions of cars that we could have picked. But yeah, it's a 1973 Cadillac Fleetwood 9950. Apparently the mileage is 20,000. I don't know how believable that is. And it just looks like, what you think, a mafia boss or...
You're nicking that from me now.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, right. Oh, okay. Well,
I'm going to send you the recording from... Oh, we can't because we lost it last week. Damn. Yeah. I can't prove I said these things. Oh, dear.
Oh, right. Well, there you go. So, yeah, we've both picked the same car then. So, yeah. Okay. See, well, what did you make of that?
Well, I reckon I thought, well, look, you're the head of an Italian crime family. You've come to the UK. You need a new set of wheels. What are you going to go for? Well, it's easy. There's the 1973 Cadillac Fleetwood that James has just mentioned. There's obviously going to be a bit of rivalry for buying it now. Anyway, it's got lots of space for all of the family. And, of course, the boys' violin cases. It's longer than the weekend with the mother-in-law. It's got the big rumbling V8. And there's a ton of room in the boot, which is perfect for accommodating people to whom you're not well disposed. Capiche? Anyway, it's blue, as James says. It's covered 20,000 miles. It looks in great shape inside and out with its blue velour upholstery. And it's got a vinyl roof too. It seems to have come to the UK in 2013 or 14. There's not much MOT history. It's now exempt. But what the MOT history there is, it doesn't give any rise for concern. And here's the price. It's £9,950. But of course, you could just make the seller an offer he couldn't refuse.
Boom, boom.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Literally, probably.
Yeah, absolutely. Bang, bang.
Yeah, so, yes. Yeah. So, yet again, on Bangers and Classics, we've been set a simple task, and we have managed to absolutely cock it up. This is wonderful. This is why people listen. It's just to hear the two of us make absolute idiots out of ourselves every week. And we don't disappoint, do we?
No, we don't. I'm going to have to stop doing this, really, because my reputation was all right, David, but it's rapidly gone downhill over the last, I think, 17 podcasts that we've done. So, I'll have to reconsider my position now.
I think Channel 5 won't employ you now.
No, apparently not.
Hopefully we'll see you next week if you're brave enough. But meantime, thanks for listening.
Yeah, cheerio from me in my Fleetwood.